Welcome to English Mystery Channel, where we make learning English fun and easy through mystery stories. Expensive problems. The sun had just begun to set, casting long shadows across the city. Inside the tall, glass-covered office building, Mr. Charles Anderson, the CEO of Anderson Enterprises, paced back and forth in his large, lavish office. The walls were adorned with certificates, awards, and photos of Mr. Anderson shaking hands with various important people. His suit was crisp, his shoes polished, but his face was a mask of deep worry. The company, once a thriving giant in the tech industry, was now facing its biggest challenge yet. For months, the profits had been declining, and the shareholders were getting restless. Mr. Anderson had been in endless meetings with the board, trying to come up with a solution. Every suggestion, every idea seemed to fall short. The company was bleeding money, and if something wasn't done soon, they would have to start laying off employees, something Mr. Anderson had promised would never happen under his leadership. But today was different. Mr. Anderson had a glimmer of hope. A rumor had reached his ears that one of his employees might have a solution, an idea that could save the company. However, there was a catch. This employee was known to be somewhat of a recluse, rarely seen in the office and never attending company events. They worked from home, and their address was unlisted. Mr. Anderson had never personally met this employee, but the rumor was enough to ignite a spark of hope in his otherwise grim outlook. Determined to find this mysterious employee and hear their idea, Mr. Anderson decided he would visit them personally. It was an unconventional approach, but desperate times called for desperate measures. He had always believed in taking action rather than waiting for problems to solve themselves. Mr. Anderson called his assistant, a sharp and efficient woman named Laura, into his office. "Laura, I need you to find the home address of this employee," he said, handing her a piece of paper with a name scribbled on it. "I'm going to visit them tonight." Laura looked at the name on the paper. "But Mr. Anderson, this employee has never provided their home address. It's against company policy to force employees to disclose that information." Mr. Anderson nodded, his face serious. "I know, Laura. But we're running out of options. I need to speak with them, and if that means bending the rules, so be it." Laura hesitated for a moment but then nodded. "I'll see what I can do, sir." As Laura left the room, Mr. Anderson sat down at his desk and stared out the window. He thought about the thousands of people who relied on Anderson Enterprises for their livelihoods. He couldn't let them down. He had to find this employee, no matter what it took. Hours later, as the city lights began to twinkle in the dusk, Laura returned to Mr. Anderson's office with an address. "I found it, sir," she said, handing him a slip of paper. "But I must warn you, it's not in the best part of town." Mr. Anderson took the paper and glanced at the address. It was in a neighborhood he was not familiar with, one far from the upscale areas where he and most of the company's executives lived. "Thank you, Laura," he said, slipping the paper into his coat pocket. "I'll handle it from here." As Mr. Anderson left the building, he couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and apprehension. He was stepping out of his comfort zone, venturing into unknown territory in more ways than one. But if this employee truly had the answer, then it would all be worth it. The drive to the address took longer than expected. The city streets became narrower, the buildings older and more worn. The bright lights of downtown gave way to dim street lamps, and the smooth roads turned into rough, pothole-ridden paths. Mr. Anderson's sleek, black car looked out of place as it rolled through the neighborhood. Finally, he arrived at the address Laura had given him. It was a small, run-down apartment building with peeling paint and broken windows. Mr. Anderson hesitated for a moment, doubting whether this could really be the home of someone who might save his company. But he pushed those thoughts aside and stepped out of the car. He approached the building and found the apartment number he was looking for. The door was old, the wood splintered, and the paint faded. Mr. Anderson took a deep breath and knocked. For a moment, there was no response. He knocked again, louder this time. Finally, he heard footsteps approaching the door. It creaked open slightly, and a pair of wary eyes peered out at him. "Who are you?" came a voice from behind the door. Mr. Anderson straightened up. "My name is Charles Anderson. I'm the CEO of Anderson Enterprises. I'm looking for an employee who lives here. I believe they may have an idea that could help our company." The door opened a little wider, revealing a young man in his late 20s, with messy hair and dark circles under his eyes. He was wearing a worn-out t-shirt and jeans, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "I'm the one you're looking for," the young man said, sounding more curious than surprised. "My name is Mark Williams." Mr. Anderson was taken aback. This disheveled young man was the one who held the key to saving the company? He quickly composed himself. "May I come in?" Mr. Anderson asked. Mark hesitated for a moment but then nodded and stepped aside. Mr. Anderson entered the small apartment. It was cluttered with papers, books, and computer parts. The only light came from a desk lamp in the corner, illuminating a computer screen filled with code. "Please, have a seat," Mark said, gesturing to a worn-out chair by the desk. Mr. Anderson sat down, feeling out of place in the cramped, untidy space. Mark pulled up a stool and sat across from him. "So, you think I can help the company?" Mark asked, his tone still skeptical. "I've heard that you might have an idea, something that could turn things around for us," Mr. Anderson said, trying to sound as earnest as possible. "The company is in trouble, and we're running out of options. I'm here because I believe in listening to every idea, no matter where it comes from." Mark leaned back, folding his arms. "I do have an idea. But it's not something that can be implemented easily. It would require a lot of changes that I'm not sure the company is ready to make." "Tell me," Mr. Anderson urged. "I need to hear it. If it's something that can help us, I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Mark sighed and then began to explain. He talked about the company's outdated systems, the inefficiencies in the way projects were managed, and the lack of innovation in recent years. He had been working on a new platform, a way to streamline processes, reduce costs, and improve productivity across the board. It was a radical approach, something that would require significant investment and a shift in the company's culture. As Mark spoke, Mr. Anderson listened intently. He could see the passion in the young man's eyes, the conviction in his voice. This was not just an idea, it was a vision that, if realized, could indeed save the company. When Mark finished, Mr. Anderson sat in silence for a moment, processing everything he had just heard. "This is impressive," he finally said. "But you're right, it won't be easy to implement. There will be resistance, and it will take time and resources." Mark nodded. "I know. But it's the only way. If we keep doing things the way we've always done them, the company will fail. We need to adapt, to innovate, to embrace new ideas. That's the only way forward." Mr. Anderson stood up, feeling a renewed sense of hope. "You're absolutely right, Mark. And I'm willing to take that risk. I'll present your idea to the board, and we'll make it happen." Mark looked surprised, almost as if he hadn't expected Mr. Anderson to agree so readily. "Are you sure?" Mark asked. "This is going to be a massive undertaking." Mr. Anderson smiled. "I'm sure. I didn't get to where I am by playing it safe. Sometimes, you have to take a leap of faith. And I believe in your vision, Mark." For the first time that evening, Mark smiled. It was a small, hesitant smile, but it was there. Thank you, Mark said quietly. I'll do everything I can to make this work. Mr. Anderson extended his hand, and Mark shook it firmly. Welcome to the team, Mark, Mr. Anderson said. You're going to help us turn this company around.